Happy Thursday, my friends, possibly my enemies. I don't know who's watching these things. I hope you noticed I have done my hair today. I got dressed up just for you. So I was thinking about why are we talking about exile in general? And the shortest answer to that is that for a long time I've always found exile to be a good analogy for the place of the Christian in a world that seems very foreign to us. We become, when we decide to follow Jesus, we become a people outside of the world. And so we recognize the true King, Jesus, and we orient our life around following him, which makes us strange, and it makes us have different values and different priorities to the rest of the world. And with that, in the Bible, we find a group of people that had a very similar experience. And so one of the things that I wanted to look at today is just this idea that that in exile we experience what is, I think, an undeniable loss of control. And for most of us, we've grown up in a world where we can largely make the decisions we want. You know, we can go to the store when we want. We can go to our houses of worship, in our case, a Christian church. We can gather in large groups. We can do all these things whenever and kind of however we want. And so when exile hits, and in our case, a quarantine hits, then it's very disorienting, right? And suddenly it feels like everything's topsy-turvy, and for us, there's this moment of a real feeling of a loss of control, right? And so that would have been largely the same for the Israelites, that they had been able to make their own rules, their own land, their own rules of worship for as long as they had been out of Egypt, right? And so they came to this point, and this foreign king came and took them away, and suddenly they didn't have that option anymore. And what is incredibly striking to me, I think I mentioned, we briefly touched on this a few weeks ago, but what is striking to me is the directions that Jeremiah gives to the people. So for a lot of us, we would think, well, I mean, whenever that happens, you need to have a tea party in Boston Harbor, right? And so if somebody's trying to take away your control, it's time for a revolution. And so for a lot of us, that is just a natural inclination. That is our cultural view. That is our American way of doing things. And so for me, I've always been very surprised at this passage in Jeremiah when he's talking to the exiles. And so this is through a letter in Jeremiah chapter 29. And I think I said this before, but some of you are probably going to be surprised that there's not just, Jeremiah, that there's more of a chapter beyond Jeremiah 29:11. And in fact, there is, which is shocking. So God is talking through Jeremiah, through this letter to the exiles, and he says, build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce, marry and have sons and daughters, find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. And so he goes on, and eventually, I have the plan. I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. But for us, this is, I think, a jarring moment, right? And so the way that we normally view things, we would say, oh, well, I mean, if you lose control, then you have to do everything in your power to regain control. And so the exiles should have been fighting a guerrilla war. And we're all familiar with Red Dawn, the classic 80s movie with Patrick Swayze or Kurt Russell, those are the guys that are kind of the same guy to me, so it's always hard to remember who's who. But the movie Red Dawn, where Russia invades America and they pretty much lock everybody up, and so then these American teenagers are fighting a guerrilla war because, of course, it's how you win freedom, right? And so for us, we think about for these people in exile. They should have been fighting a guerrilla war. They should have been working on taking back their freedom, because that is the best good, right? But God gives them different directions. God gives them different instructions, and he says, hey, while you're there, prosper and enjoy yourself and increase in number, give people in marriage and celebrate. And what I want to point out here is not that it's always bad to want to seek your freedom, but what I wanted to point out is the first thing is we have largely this idea that we are so in control of our fate is not really the truth anyway. So for most of us, we have the ability to vote in the United States, and we have the ability to peacefully protest and things like that. But largely, none of us can just single-handedly say, hey, you know what, in America we shouldn't do X anymore. And then all of America says, oh, yeah, good point, we shouldn't do that. That's not the way it works here. And so for a lot of us, we go through life and we think we have this certain level of control, but the truth is we don't. And what I think exile does to us is it reminds us of that. And it also reminds us that life can be pretty good even if we can't control everything, even if we cannot make everything. None of us, we were never designed to be able to fashion this world exactly into the image we wanted. That's not our job, and that was never our job, even back to Genesis. God gave us as ambassadors, and our job was to try to fashion this world into what He wanted. But we have to do that through the way He wants us to do it. And in Jeremiah, we have this shocking kind of notice, at least in that circumstance, the people of Israel were called to work for the good of their city, to celebrate within that, to boost the Babylonian economy. And so they probably had to be listening. And there's a reason nobody liked Jeremiah, and that's because he said things that they didn't want to hear. And so for the exiles, Jeremiah gave them this edict from God. Hey, while you're recognizing your loss of control, why not embrace the freedom you do have? And that freedom is to live a life of prosperity anyway. Give your sons and your daughters in marriage. Celebrate the good things in life. Just because you are captives in a faraway land does not mean that you have zero freedom. It just means that your freedom is limited. And I think that is a healthy way to view things. And so what we do, I think, is we go into kind of these two poles of this, and we think either we have the freedom to do anything, anytime, anywhere that we want, or we don't have any freedom at all. And to me, the exile is a great lesson in the fact that God's level of freedom is so much beyond. See, the exiles didn't have a political freedom, but they did have the freedom to choose who they would be in the exile. And maybe this is the lesson for us. Maybe this is actually what we can take from this. So they had this freedom of exile, and I wanted to point out what I think is one of the most amazingly comical moments in all of the Gospels, because I think it really hits this whole thing home. So this is in John chapter 8, and so Jesus is talking, and he said to the Jews who had believed him, Jesus says, if you hold to my teaching, you're really my disciples, then you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. I mean, okay, yeah, the truth will set you free. That's a great thing to say. Then these Jewish people said, we are Abraham's descendants and have never been slaves of anyone. How can you say that we shall be set free? We have never been slaves of anyone. So one of the primary identifiers of the Jewish people's faith was that they had been set free from Egypt. One of the primary identifiers for this is the Second Temple era of the Jewish people during the Second Temple era was that they had been set free from Babylonian exile, and they were allowed to rebuild their temple. One of the primary ways that they viewed the world was with a frustration because Rome was in charge. And so there's this amazing irony here because they're basically saying, oh yeah, yeah, whatever, Jesus, we're totally free. But Jesus is pointing out, no, you've never had the kind of freedom that he's offering. And this is what I want to really drive home for us, Christians in quarantine and exile. There is nothing anyone can do to take away the freedom that God has given us. This is a freedom from Jesus Christ, Jesus who lost on a Roman cross and won 3 days later in an empty tomb. This Jesus who created the universe gives us the freedom to follow him and to worship him regardless of what anybody else says. Now, one of the things that goes along with that is a call to take up our cross. And that means that sometimes we sacrifice what we think we are deserved, or what we think we are owed, or what we think we are entitled to, in order to seek the good of the other people in our world, in order to seek the good. And so even in exile, and even if you don't approve of Babylon and the way that Babylon is doing things, we have the freedom to find this joy. We have the freedom to prosper. We have the freedom because that's a freedom given by God. And so we don't need to worry. And so one of the gifts of exile is that we are so often able to float through life thinking we have a level of control that we do not have. One of the gifts of exile is to recognize that we don't actually have that control, but our freedom is not based in that control, because our freedom is based in who God is. And so God gives us this amazing freedom. Seek the good of the city. And so I want to challenge you to think about that today. Whenever you're going through your life, are you worried? Are you concerned? Are you tied in knots? Are you anxious about the things that Babylon might be doing, that Egypt might be doing, that Rome might be doing? Because I truly believe that for us as citizens of Jesus' kingdom, he's the only one that really matters. And following him, it doesn't matter whether anybody says we can or not. So I would encourage you to take this day and to really consider, what is true freedom in Christ? Is it that I'm allowed to do whatever I want whenever I want? Or is it that I'm allowed to take my cross, deny myself, and follow him? So I hope you are maintaining some levels of sanity. I think most of us are oscillating between losing it and between enjoying the sunshine. At least for this morning, I didn't wear a jacket yesterday, and then it turned into a really nasty day. So anyway, try and stay in touch with one another in this exile. It's hard, and it's okay if it's hard. Life is never meant to be easy all the time. Thanks for being wherever you are. See ya.